All right, you guys are still feeling good, and I'm feeling great. And this is part two of my lecture, Concrete Significant Details. My name is Gary Lilly, and the last time when I left you, we were looking at some tools to use in strengthening your characters and building more formidable and characters with more definition, more dimension, facets to move them to something unique, someone unique. And some of the areas that we looked at to do that were in their choice, in your close choices of details on their clothing, their jewelry, their physical traits and what that means, how you can use them, their habits and mannerisms, something that people do that makes them unique, something you could show. And remember, they're all sensory details. They're all sensory details. It's about the images. Now, we're going to step into what do you do with setting and concrete details, concrete significant details. Remember, it's about an image. It's about being specific. You know, it's about having the detail that moves that specific image, even though it suggests maybe abstraction, generalization, a judgment, or an emotion. The detail is what moves that abstraction by the sharper image that amplifies it, and where you're not just telling, you're letting it develop, and you're letting people get their aha moment, because you are developing something that they could see and they could hold on to, and you get meaning behind that. Now, that is for the characters. Now, for setting, for place. Now, that works in two ways. One, it establishes location, region, season, and uses everything that's associated with that. Language, for one, geography, how this all works out. It uses all that, and it also assists in developing tone and tone as well, mood in the piece, philosophies in the piece, because it develops all that within the narrative, because it's dealing with the internal landscape, heart and head, heart and mind, yes, as well as the external landscape, the geography that we walk in, the places where we live, what the weather's like there, how we talk, what that indicates about place and region. So there are these ways that you can build a sense of place. Let's just call it that, a sense of place, through your understanding of significant details and how they could help us make the territory visible, make the territory smelt and heard that we are living in, or that we people our characters in. Because remember, the setting is just a place where the story happens. Now, so you want to give enough information to help the readers visualize where they are, because the setting is important. It gives us everything that the characters see. It gives them a complete history of where the scene occurs, the psychological, the internal world, the psychological and the philosophical. The external world, like I say, that's the physical world that we walk in, that we see, smell, everything else. Remember, they're all sensory, right? Yeah. But now, here's the deal. Too many minor details, in that sense, bogs the story down. And it's rather hard to move forward, so you find yourself dragging. So you want to keep those things moving. Geography refers to specific aspects of water, landforms, ecosystems, topography. It also includes the climate, the trees, the plants, the animals, and the rocks or so that are in it, right? But it can create obvious influences in the story. You got to get through the pass. You got to get over the mountain. You got to get through the summer if you're living in North Carolina. It's like that, right? So the influences of mankind don't be afraid to go there too. You have to. Who doesn't? How can we not see the effects of global warming on our environment today? You think that doesn't happen in the stories? Yeah, man has had an effect on the stories that we always deal with. What are those landmarks? The dams, the dikes that break, that cause the floods, or the blowing up of the dikes. Yeah. hmm And so, dams, bridges, ports, towns, cities, government monuments, you know, burial grounds, cemeteries, famous buildings. That's the influences of the mankind on the setting. Now, the natural stuff, that's something different. And the psychological. So, we're going to look to see today how Gene Toomer uses all of this details for his characters and for the terrain that the story is set in. And we're going to look at one of his short stories. He was calling them vignettes. What they are, they're microfiction before anybody started calling them microfiction, you know. And so, but he has his book Cain, and it has all these stories and poems. He was considered a poet. He was he was born in D.C. But his folks were from the South, you know, part of the migrations. And here's this thing. Gene Toomer was around, and some people consider him part of the Harlem Renaissance, except that many of the Harlem Renaissance writers didn't, because, well, he had this issue with wanting to be just a writer. He was of mixed race. He was biracial, and he didn't feel, he never had a footing in either world. And so that was a conflict for him that he was always trying to work through and stuff. So we can see that about him. And so, and those are things that you know, that also gives us the detail for time, for place. You know, the 1920s. You know what? People getting lynched. People aren't that far removed then from the Reconstruction period, you know? They're not that far removed, therefore, from slavery, you know? So he's probably one of the first generations born free, you know, in this country. I mean, you know, of African American. But that's Gene Toomer. But he did find a community with Georgia O'Keeffe and her whole troupe of artists and writers and free thinkers. So he did find that. This was his only book, Cain, and this is what the story Becky is in. It probably has 800 words, a little bit more maybe than 800 words, and we're going to see how he uses character details, significant details for characters, choice details for setting and place as well. Let's see, and I will read through it, and we'll see what we can get from there, okay? Okay, let's look at it. It's in that link. I sent a link that you can access to read the story. It has a smaller 4-sentence paragraph to start this piece. That's also the same 4-sentence paragraph that closes the piece. No matter what that, you know. So I want you to be aware of that and know that this is where it has to end. Okay. So let me find my story. Here it is, and we'll go from there. This is that first 4 sentences. Becky. Becky was a white woman who had 2 Negro sons. She's dead. They're gone away. The pines whisper to Jesus. The Bible flaps its leaves with an aimless rustle on her mouth. Now, what happens in that 4 sentences, that 4 short sentences right there? It establishes a religious tone, you know, from the pines whispering to Jesus to the Bible flapping on its mouth. Look how the leaves also accent, you know, takes the place of a tree. Yeah, just about. And it introduces the title character and the key defining conflicts, and the things about her, a white woman with two Negro sons, alludes to a setting that it is the danger that's involved here. This is a setting in the early 1900s. Early 1900s, you know. And we can look at what happens now. Just what happened with the language. There's a dialect that's happening here. There's also, and then the diction and the syntax of the narration is established in that first part. It gives us just enough of a hint. What a detail from the way he's speaking. From the way he's speaking. Let's continue. Becky had one Negro son. Who gave it to her? Damn buck nigger, said the white folks' mouth. She wouldn't tell. Common, godforsaken, insane, white, shameless went, said the white folks' mouth. Her eyes were sunken. Key details. Significant. Her eyes were sunken. Her neck stringy. Her breasts fallen. Till then. Taking their words, they filled her like a bubble rising. Then she broke, mouth getting in a twist that held her eyes harsh, vacant, staring. Who gave it to her? Low-down nigger with no self-respect, said the black folk mouths. White folks and black folks built her cabin, fed her and her growing baby, prayed secretly to God who put his cross upon her and cast her out. Dig it. That is a cadence that comes strictly from the African American church. The most powerful thing about this whole piece, and how that first four sentences function, as it moves through, it functions as a chorus through the rest of the story. It frames the story, and also bits and pieces of it, those details function as a chorus when they appear within the text as we're going through. This is like, besides those two little parts of paragraphs of four sentences that open and close this piece, it has five paragraphs in it. That's it. 800 something words. So it's pretty short and it has to get there quick. Now, what are the issues it's bringing up? Miscegnation. Against the law. For whites and blacks to intermingle, have sex, have children. And boy, and did those children suffer the lack of social activities with other people. They were in social isolation from whites as well as blacks. These are mixed race kids. Okay. It also hints toward lynchings. Why do you think she wouldn't tell anybody who the father was? She cared enough about him not to get him lynched. Cared enough about him there. And it also shows the whole contradiction of Christian charity along with that social exile, that isolation. Christian charity, they still felt like they had to do something to help her, even though they despised what she had done. That's all in this first paragraph. What did he never, the perpetrator, the man, was never identified, but they still provided help. They built her cabin, but they would give her food. They would try to help her out, and they blame God for casting her out, but it's really them, under the pretenses of doing what is right with God. Isn't that how it always goes? But these are the things that are identified by the start of this piece. Race is a major factor. Now, who is Becky? White woman, gave birth to two black sons. That her define. Now, when the first was born, this is the second paragraph. When the first was born, the white folks said they had no more to do with her. And black folks, they too joined hands to cast her out. The pines whispered to Jesus. That's that phrase. The railroad boss said not to say he said it, But she could live, if she wanted to, on the narrow strip of land between the railroad and the road. John Stone, who owned the lumber and the bricks, would have shot the man who told he gave the stuff to Lonnie Deacon, who stole out there at night and built a cabin, a single room, held down to earth. Oh, fly away to Jesus by a leaning chimney. I hope you're reading this with me because it is beautiful. And the single rose holding it down, holding the place down, this single room cabin, a single room, holding it down to earth. Oh, fly to Jesus by a leaning chimney. So you can see that the construction of it, since it's all built at night and on the down low, and in a rush to get it done, more than likely, the chimney is already leaning. It's already leaning. And she's living on a strip of land between the railroad and the highway. So that's probably about maybe 30 feet or something. Maybe there's a turn there in the railroad. It's about a 30-foot expanse of land that he built this cabin on. So, but at least she has somewhere to live with her child. With her child. That's the first child. She has somewhere to live, and they don't like it. Look at the details. John Stone, who owns the lumber, wants everything kept secret. Oh, it's only the men that are named that are helping her. What is that to say? Are they white men or black men? It doesn't say, but we do know this. She is isolated from whites and blacks. Pray for Becky. 6 trains each day rumbled past. We get a sense of how the territory, and shook the ground under her cabin. Fords and horse and mule-drawn buggies went back and forth along the road. No one ever saw her. Trainmen, passengers who heard about her, threw out papers and food, threw out little crumpled slips of paper scribbled with prayers as they passed her eye-shaped piece of sandy ground islandized between the road and the railroad track, pushed up where a blue-sheen God with listless eyes could look at it. Folks from the town took turns, unknown, of course, to each other, in bringing corn and meat and sweet potatoes, even sometimes snuff. But thank you, Jesus. Oh, David, Georgia, grinding cane and boiling syrup never went her way without some sugar sap. No one ever saw her. The boys grew up and ran around. When he was 5 years old, as people reckon it, Hugh Jordan saw him carrying a baby. Becky has another son, was what the whole town knew, but nothing was said. And for the first part of man that says things to the likes of that had been told itself that if there was a Becky, that Becky was now dead. Not physically dead, but look what happens here. Look what happens. Let's keep in mind how this diction and the syntax and the rhythm of it that we find in the African American church is still rolling through here. We get to those Christian phrases, and it kind of establishes that Becky is not dead yet, but it establishes something because it's talking about her like it's already an epilogue. That's the way it started. She's dead now. The boys are gone home to Jesus. It just goes there. The Bible flaps its leaves. Just keeping that there. No more details. More details about place. That island of land, the eye of land, let's say, between the road and the railroad. Interesting that's the significant detail that goes there when he's talking about her being cast out by the God who sees everything, or supposedly, or who the town people, whites and blacks, are attributing to throwing her out. And a single room held down to earth by a leaning chimney. And 6 trains each day shook her cabin. We're getting details about the place. Fords, horse buggies, mule buggies, And then the psychological detail, the psychological choice, significant detail, thin curl of smoke a wraith of smoke. Smoke as a symbol that she was still alive. That she's still alive. You know? How great this piece is working for me and stuff. Let me read that part. So, the boys grew sullen. The boys grew sullen and coming. Old pines whisper to Jesus. Tell him to come and press sweet Jesus' lips upon their lips and eyes. Oh Lord, help those poor boys who don't have a father or a mother much. You know, it seemed as though with those two big fellows there could be no room for Becky. The part that prayed wondered if perhaps she really died and they had buried her. No one dared ask. They beat and cut a man who meant nothing at all in the mentioning that they lived along the road. White or colored, no one knew, and least of all themselves. Oh, look what he did there. It shifts from the thinking about the man they cut. Was he? This question goes both ways. White or colored, the man? No one knew, at least of all themselves. Oh, they don't. So then the question also implies to what are the boys? And this is one of Toomer's main questions in his life. What was he? Black or white? That's how deep the divisions are. You know, in this land, that's the details. Those are the details that shape that landscape, that create that sense of place. We know we are in the South, but even if it wasn't in the South, race was still a factor in this country then. Yeah, the boys. Look how now people are praying for them, and they drifted around town from job. They drifted around from job to job. We who would cast their mother out because of them, could we take them in for real? They answered black and white folks by shooting up 2 men and leaving town. God damn the white folks. God damn the niggas, they shouted as they left the town. Becky? Smoke curled up from her chimney. Nobody noticed it. A creepy feeling came over all who saw that thin wraith of smoke and felt the trembling of the ground. Folks began to take her food again. They quit it soon because they had a fear. Becky, if dead, might be a haint. And if alive, it took some nerve even to mention it. Oh, Pines, whispered to Jesus, keeping that gospel refrain running through this whole piece. It's so short. And this is what he uses to build the tension. And look how he advanced the story. He advanced the story from one paragraph to the next. Big swing of time, moves the story forward, and gives us different details that we can see the progression of their lives from the cabin being built. Key significant details. Now, let's look at what the horning is. The boys. They're sullen, cunning. They grew up in this social isolation. He's given us all this. They're violent. They're unapproachable. He gives us these details. They cut a man for nothing because he asked them, oh yeah, you live on the road, right? You know, they cut a man. And so they ended up shooting 2 men and having to leave town. That is the power of the isolation. That is how it created a violence within them because of the hurt, the pain, the fear, the anger. So, good details. And that confused cultural identity, just a slight, easy way to bring that up in between the man they cut and themselves. What was he? White or colored? No one knew, least of all themselves. That brings that up. That's the main tension in this piece. That lack of identity. What a great detail to make that happen. And let's look. And the boys are unanchored because of their isolation. They roam from job to job, suggesting that maybe they didn't fit in anywhere, and they're not afraid to fight back. You know. The prayer to Jesus for the boys. The people are praying for Jesus. The boys are cursing them out. You know. Yeah. Let's look at the death now of Becky, and those details. It was Sunday. Our congregation had been visiting at Pulverton and were coming home. There was no wind. The autumn sun The bell from Ebenezer Church, listless and heavy. Even the pines were stale, slicky, like the smell of food that makes you sick. Ooh, good choices to create the philosophical and psychological move in this piece. Details, significant choice details that set up that psychological underpinning and just drive it home. This is a haunting. Before we turned the bend of the road that would show us the Becky cabin now. The horses stock still, pushed back their ears, and nervously whinnied. We urged and whipped them on. Quarter of a mile away, thin smoke curled up from the leaning chimney. The leaning chimney is always some shaky ground. And that thin curl of smoke, that thin waif of smoke, that's the thinnest life she can, symbol of her life. It's wispy. It's not a strong roaring fire. It's a thin curl of smoke. Deprivation of spirit. Deprivation of spirit. Quarter mile away, thin smoke curled up from the leaning chimney. Oh, pines, whisper to Jesus. Come back with that chorus again. Goose flesh came on my skin through, though there was neither chill nor wind. Eyes left their sockets for the cabin. Ears burned and strove, uncanny eclipse. Fear closed my mind. We were just about to pass. Pines, shout to Jesus. The ground trembled as a ghost train rumbled by. The chimney fell into the cabin. Its thud was a hollow report. Ages having been passed since it went off, Barlow and I pulled out of our seats, dragged to the door that had swung open. Through the dust, they dragged through the door. Look how that's where they moved. They didn't really want to go in there. They're afraid. Dragged to the door that had swung open. Through the dust we saw the bricks in a mound upon the floor. Becky, if she was there, lay under them. I thought I heard a groan. Barlow mumbling something, threw his Bible on the pile. No one has ever touched it. Somehow we got away. My buggy was still on the road. The last thing I remember was whipping old Dan like fury. I remember nothing after that. That is, until I reached town and folks crowded around to get the true sense, get the true word of it. Becky was a white woman who had 2 Negro sons. She's dead. They're gone away. The pines whisper to Jesus. The Bible flaps its leaves with an aimless rustle on her mouth. And that is Gene Toomer's Becky, where he uses all of those significant details to create the psychological underpinning of this story, to introduce what the tropes are, the church feel and the dialect, to locate us into the Georgia where it is. The Georgia where it is, the pines, and if you're going to use geography, you want to use trees that belong there, specific details. He does all that. He creates this mood with the thin smoke. Remember, he's building the external world that this story is set, and the internal world that the people carry around, like the boys and their anger, and the townspeople and their fear, their disrespect and disregard for her, and then eventually their fear because they profess to be a Christian people, but they're not acting very Christian. Except they, oh Lord, the pines whisper to Jesus. And in the end, they start recognizing what damage they have done to her. So either she's dead, and if she's dead, then she's a ghost. But if she's alive, she's a reflection of the damage they have put upon her. Gene Toomer, hey, awesome. Well, that's my lecture on and demonstration of like Toomer's use of choice significant details to build characters, to create everything he needs in this 800-word piece. 800 something words. You know, from Becky's vacant eyes on to people not even seeing her, to the town people's fear, all insignificant details, and using the train and the shaking of the ground and the eclipse. Ah.